Today, we're going over everything you need to know about 401ks. Let's break it down. The first thing you need to know is how important having a retirement account is for your future. So a 401k is a retirement account, and 8 out of 10 millionaires invested in their 401k and attributed it as part of their success. So let's break down what a 401k is in more detail. A 401k is an employer-sponsored plan, meaning it's an account that is set up by your company. It's rarely set up by an individual. Typically, you work for a big company, they give you a 401k plan option as a benefit, and they set up which company you work with on that. You also have the option to contribute to that account, and there's often an employer match. So you have to choose what percentage you do, and then the employer often matches a portion of what you do back into that account as well. Then lastly, you have to choose what investments you want those funds to go into. So let's talk about those contribution types so that you can understand what the different options are and what might be best for you. So you have a pre-tax option as the first one, where you say, I'm going to save on the taxes now and I'm going to pay them later. So I don't want to pay the taxes right now. I might be in a tough financial situation and I still want to contribute, but I might want to do pre-tax just for now. You also have Roth, where you say, you know what, I'm going to pay the taxes now, but I'm going to have everything later be tax-free. And that's a huge benefit of Roth, is that the basis, which is essentially the amount that you put in, and the earnings, how much it grows, are essentially tax-free if you wait until you're at least age 59 and a half and you've had those funds for 5 years. But given that this is a retirement account, you're likely going to hit that threshold to be able to have the basis and the earnings be tax-free, which is incredible. And there's an important note here that if you take out funds prior to 59 and a half years old, you have a 10% penalty for taking those funds out. There's rare exceptions to this, but just know there's a penalty for trying to take funds out early, and you can't always even take funds out early, and we'll get into that later as well. Let's take a look at an example of what happens if you contribute pre-tax versus Roth. So in this example, we'll say you contribute $1,000 and it grows at 8% per year, and it does that over 40 years. So basically that first year, it's up $80, and then you get another 8% on top of that $1,080, and it just keeps going like that. The ending value, because it keeps compounding and growing on itself, ends up being $21,724.52, which is incredible. The fact that you can go from $1,000 to $21,000, almost $22, is incredible. But if we look at that example and we assume you have pre-tax contributions, you pay zero in taxes now, just the amount that you're putting into the account. Now, you can say that I'm going to pay on those taxes when I take it back out. So you would owe income tax on the $21,724. But you might be in a lower tax rate. So you might be in a 22% tax bracket right now, and you might be in 15% when you retire. So in this example, if you pay 15% on that, you would end up paying $3,258 in taxes. However, if you have a Roth, then you pay the tax on the $1,000 right now, and then you pay no taxes later, again, assuming you wait until you're actually in retirement and meet those thresholds. You pay, let's say 22% now. You might be, again, in a higher tax bracket because you have an income. You would only pay $220 on that $1,000 that you contributed, which is incredible, because then you can see you basically save $3,000 in taxes by doing Roth the longer you have that investment there. So it's important to know the earlier you start, the more beneficial Roth can be, because you can have those earnings grow tax-free. But the later you start, then pre-tax might not have as much of a bad downside to it. Also, you might, if you have a really high income, it might make more sense for you to do pre-tax, since you might be in a really high tax rate right now, but you might be in a lower tax rate later. Let's talk about how much to contribute now. A lot of people wondering, how much do I do? And it really depends. Here's a very common budgeting guideline. It's called the 50-30-20 guideline. And this essentially says that you should attribute 50% of your budget to your needs, like housing and utilities and groceries and just things that you need to literally just survive. And then having 30% to wants. And then this says 20% to investing. This is a good just starting place for a lot of people, but it really depends on your own personal financial situation. If you've already saved up a lot for retirement, you might not need to do 20%. Ideally, it'd still be really good to do that. It's rare that people overinvest for retirement, so tend to push on that higher end to make sure that you're going to be in a good place and that you're taking care of yourself. But if you were 50 years old or 40 years old and you haven't started at all, you might have to try to do a little bit more than that. I know that's a really high number for people to have 20% taken out right away. So If that's the case for you and that's a really tough thing, just start doing something for retirement, and your future self will thank you for it. Now, you also might notice that needs being 50% might be a bit tough. Other videos will be coming about how to budget and how to budget better and making sure that you can get those needs back to 50% if you're above that. But this is a rough guideline on here. Again, it depends on where you are. There's advice from people out there saying 15 to 25%. This one kind of splits right down the middle and says do 20%. But again, depends on how early you start and how much you already have saved. If you want to know more about that, you can often talk with a financial coach or an advisor to figure out what do I need to do to catch back up. You also have to choose investments in your 401k. So you have two main schools of thought. You can do a target date fund, which is essentially a fund that is managed by somebody else. So there's a fund manager that's dedicated to those, and they choose the investments over time, and they allocate that to what they feel is going to be appropriate for somebody at your age. Now, this investment becomes more conservative over time. We'll talk about the specifics of how that works in a moment. But these investments become more conservative over time so that if the stock market crashes when you're at 65 years old, that you don't lose all of your money and you have a little more protection there. We'll break down how they do that more in just a minute. This is also targeted in a way that it's targeting the year you will turn 65, and it's rounded to 5-year increments. You'll see these listed as whatever company target date fund. It might say that even explicitly, and then it'll have a year next to it, like 2065. So if you're born in 2000 and you have a 2065 fund, it's assuming you're going to be 65 in 2065. And it rounds to 5-year increments. So if you were born in 2002, it will still target 2065 for that, but it's not going to be super different for somebody who's 62 versus 61 in terms of the time frame of how they calculate that back out. So it's fair for them to round it to 5-year increments for the ease of management there. You also can choose to build your own portfolio. Now, this involves you having to pick from the investment or investments that your company offers. You are a little more in control of how you want to invest this here, but you also need to know a little bit about what you're doing. If you don't know what to do, you again can talk with a financial advisor. The higher amount of money that you have, it might make more sense to talk to an advisor so you can get a better return on that. But if you don't have a huge investment profile right now, the most important thing is how much you contribute more so than it is where you have it invested. And target date funds are often a suitable position for people to invest their money, as it's going to be tailored to their age and assuming that they are going to retire around that time. If you have situations other than that, again, financial advisors or coaches can be really helpful for that there. But you can also choose your own investments out of stocks, bonds, just different mutual funds, and we'll break that down right now. So stocks are essentially ownership of a company. You can choose to be a part owner, and people buy these stocks expecting that it's going to increase in value or that it is going to pay a dividend. So basically, as an owner, a company can say, thank you for buying our stock. We appreciate you being a part owner of Google or whatever, and we're going to give you a dividend. Now, when they do that, let's say the stock in this example is $100. If they pay a $5 dividend, then that means the stock price decreases by the amount of that dividend because the worth of the company is going down. So now that stock price would become $95, and you can choose if you want to reinvest that back in and essentially say, like, you know what, I'm still going to keep just $100 in there. I'm going to own more than just one share. I'm going to own a partial share of this company now. Or you can have it paid to you. This is rare in 401ks that you can have it paid to you. Generally, if you're investing in a retirement account, it usually makes more sense to just have it reinvested so that it can keep growing for you and that it can keep compounding. However, if you have an individual stock, maybe your company has part of their stock in the 401k, you might be able to participate in that and then have that paid to you. But again, normally if you're targeting a retirement account here, you're more likely looking to have the funds basically reinvested back into that account so that you can just keep that money growing and let it go for you. Now, you also have bonds as options within accounts. So a bond is essentially a loan where you agree to loan money to a bank or a government, and then they are expected to pay you back with interest on the amount that you essentially gave them. Bonds are typically safer than stocks, but they don't provide as great of a return. So what you'll see is as you get closer to retirement, people tend to position bonds into their account a bit more, and they have like some of the funds in stocks and some of it in bonds, and they get more conservative over time, which is exactly what those target date funds do, and we'll break down an example of that in just a moment. Another important piece to know is what is a mutual fund. A mutual fund essentially is a compilation of different investments. So Typically, people think about buying in the stock market of I will buy one share of Google or whatever company. But if you want to have a mutual fund, it lets you say, hey, I don't want to just buy one stock. Let me buy portions of stocks at a discount, basically, or not a discount, but a smaller cost to you. So you pool your money with other investors and you essentially own partial shares. So instead of needing to buy one stock of a company for $100, you can still invest $100, but now you own 0.2% of however many companies, and it just depends on how many, what the worth is in those mutual funds. But you can essentially own a big whole bag of investments by having a mutual fund. And this helps diversify your account a lot more, and it takes away the risk of one company going bankrupt and then you losing your retirement because of that. That's a big fear people tend to have about the stock market, is that they think, oh no, if everything tanks, then my retirement's going to be ruined. But if you have your investments in tons of companies, for example, one of these mutual funds is the S&P 500, or an index fund called the S&P 500. It essentially lets you invest in 500 of the largest companies. And what are the odds that all 500 of them go negative? I mean, knock on wood, but highly unlikely that all of those would go bankrupt and then you would lose your entire retirement. That would mean something probably very catastrophic happened in the world. So again, fingers crossed nothing happens there. But essentially, this takes away a huge amount of risk and you still get the average return of what those companies have done. Historically, the S&P 500 has returned around 8 to 12%. People tend to say 10%, kind of right down the middle. Again, if you look over a long enough time frame. Not guaranteed that's what has historically done, but yeah, you can essentially participate in the growth and the earnings of what those big companies are doing. Here's an example of that target date fund that we mentioned earlier. So in this one, you can see that they start with stocks as a bigger portion of their account, and you have your age there at the very bottom. And on that, you can see that they start attributing more bonds into the account, or start contributing that way, so that you end up having a safer investment. Again, bonds are safer than stocks typically, and they typically are inversely correlated. So if stock prices go down, the bond prices tend to go up a little bit because people look for a safer investment. Not always 100% true, but that tends to be what happens. So it essentially helps navigate that risk and takes away some of the struggles that you might run into and some of that fear that you might have of looking at your account and seeing that it's negative or going down at all. But this essentially takes away some of that risk on there and helps you be able to have that safety as you get closer to retirement. There's a few important concepts that we need to know, and honestly, this is probably the most important part of this video are these next few slides, so make sure to stick around because it's going to be really helpful to make sure you know how these work. So your first thing that you need to know, a 401k is not a bank account. I used to work in a place where I was helping people with their 401ks every day. I believe I helped 7,000 different people in total. I had a bit of a tracker on how many I had helped, but when doing that, I had to often explain to people that a 401k is a retirement account and it's not a bank account. You might not be able to pull your funds from your bank account, or from your 401k rather. So let's talk about those different options. So with withdrawals here, access to funds prior to your retirement are very limited. You might not be able to take those funds out at all if you're working at a company. There are times where somebody can be facing a tough financial situation and still not be able to pull money from their 401k. So don't assume that you can take those funds out of that account. It's not always possible. Again, this is not a bank account. It's a retirement account. Make sure you know that. You want to make sure that you have your savings account be your emergency fund. Typically, in a good emergency fund is 3 to 6 months of your expenses, and you would want to keep that in a savings account or a high yield savings account. But a 401k should be your retirement account. So keep savings account separate from a retirement account. Don't put money in your 401k that you know you're going to need in a short period of time. Now, there can be options to pull it out in certain situations. Oftentimes you need to provide documentation on that, and then you would owe income taxes and usually a penalty on it as well, that 10% penalty that we were talking about earlier. But you can also do a really unique thing where you can take a loan from your 401k. This, again, might not always be true for every company or every person's financial situation. Each company has different guidelines on how this works, but you can borrow money from many 401k plans. And when you do this, I want to caution you on this. there are some pros and some cons to it, but there are definitely cons to be aware of on here. So the funds are removed from the market, meaning that it's no longer invested when you take those funds back out, which can be really devastating to some of the growth that you could have in that account. You do agree to pay yourself back with interest though, so you do get a little bit of growth still going in there, but it's more your future self just agreeing to contribute more, which is like, it's still kind of good, but you just be better off typically. If you know you're going to try to take a loan from your 401k, you're probably just better off lowering how much you're contributing and not having to take that loan to temporarily cover whatever increase in expense you have, and then bump your contributions back up. It's something that's there if you need it, but it's essentially like a pull the ripcord sort of approach on here, and you cannot stop the payments once you start. That's also critical to know. So you have your payments taken directly from your paychecks, which basically means payroll is going to deduct it every single time you have a paycheck. And let's say you have a flexible schedule and you might be working for just a few hours in 1 month. Let's say you have a really unique situation like that. There is a chance, if you have a high enough loan payment, that your entire essential paycheck will go to pay off that loan. And you end up with no paycheck. So it is going to come out no matter what. There are incredibly few situations where I've seen that they actually stop the contributions for you, but like 99.9% of the time, you cannot stop loan payments once you start them. So just be aware, if you take a $100 payment on your loan every month, then you are committing to that until you either leave that job and then you either have to pay it off in full, we'll talk about that in a second, or that you are just going to have that payment continue just for as long as you're at that company. And then yes, if you leave your job, you still have to pay that loan, sometimes in full. Sometimes they let you continue to make those payments on your own. Sometimes that involves physically sending a check every month, which is a big pain in the butt, and I wouldn't want to have to worry about that. Or you might have to pay it off in full, and then that can be a really big burden. If you took a $20,000 loan from your 401k and then you lose your job, and then now you have $20,000 that you either need to pay, or you end up having to pay taxes on that and a penalty, that can be really devastating to your account and just to your financial health. So I don't want you to have to be stuck in a situation like that. So make sure that a 401k loan should be the last resort of, I don't have other options that I can use to just save up for this expense. It's not something I would encourage anybody to use for a want. Like I wouldn't use a 401k loan to renovate a kitchen. That's going to be more devastating to your future than it seems like it would be. But let's talk about that. So if you borrow from a 401k, let's say you have this example here where you borrow $5,000 and you expect to earn a 10% rate of return. Again, that's what the historical average of the S&P 500 has been. Then you would assume that you are paying yourself back with interest on that loan. That's something that's predetermined for you, is that rate that you pay on there. It's often tied to the interest rate, so it might change year over year or quarter over quarter even. But let's say you pay yourself back with 7% interest and you pay that loan over 5 years, which is a common maximum amount of time people will have a limit on their loan. And then you have that invested for essentially until you reach retirement. So let's say you start this at 25, you finish paying the loan at 30, and then you keep the funds invested till you're age 65. That essentially costs $6,732 from your future, which is not too devastating, but it's also not great. Like that's $6,700 less than you would have had if you had not taken the loan. But if you lose your job and you end up having to pay off that loan, or if you end up not being able to pay off that loan, then you can have those taxes. That money gets paid essentially back to the government for extra taxes and penalty that you would owe on that. And then the amount of money that's no longer being invested in the market ends up being $189,000, which is just horribly devastating to your financial future. Again, this should be a last resort. A few things that you need to know is that it is a lot more of a cost than just the interest that you pay yourself. Because you think, oh, I'm paying myself back with interest, I'm doing something good. And it's like a little good, but you're much better off financially speaking if you can avoid having to take a 401k loan. Again, last resort here. You also pay the loan with after-tax dollars. And this is something that's really important to know, which means that you pay the taxes on the interest when you withdraw, when you withdraw the funds, but you already paid taxes when paying the loan at first. So you're not double taxed on the entire loan, but you are double taxed on the interest of the loan. And not a lot of people point that out as a downside. Again, you're not fully double taxed. That's a common myth, but you do have part of this that is being double taxed. So it's important just to know, I prefer not giving extra money to the government if I don't have to. So another reason to be cautious about when to take a loan. And again, the most important thing is your money's just no longer invested in the market if you do this, and it just opens you up to risk of losing that job and then having this $189,000 consequence out of that. Okay, if there's one thing I want you to take away from this video, it's the importance of compound interest and how you can use this in your 401k. So compound interest essentially says that when you have $1,000 invested here and you earn a 10% rate of return, after 1 year, it will grow $100. So you would have $100 growth and that portfolio is now worth $1,100. But now you earn 10% on that $1,100. So now you made $110 from that growth there. So you've made an extra 10 that you made just because you already made 100 last year. So this ends up compounding and growing a lot. And you don't really see much changing here on this graph. If we look at 3 years, you get $121 and you're seeing like, okay, I got another $11 on top of the extra growth that I had from last year, but you're still getting 100, 110, and then 121, and it just keeps growing more and more and more. And you can see after just 3 years, your 1,000 has turned into 1,300, which is already incredible. But if we expand this out over a longer period of time, you can see that this starts to become an exponential curve. And you'll see that this makes it a lot easier to start earlier. So if you start with $1,000 and you get that 10% rate of return 1 year, again, we saw that's $1,100, but after 10 years, that 1,000 has turned into almost $2,600. If you wait 20 years, it's now $6,700. And if you wait 30 years, it's now $17,000. And if you wait 40 years, it's $45,000. So think about that for a second. If you're 25 and this is your first time setting up any type of retirement account here, the difference between how much you contribute early on is incredible. So you can take a $1,000 and turn that into $45,000 for your future self. Inflation's going to cut that down a little bit in terms of what that's worth. Subscribe for more videos on that if you want to learn more about how inflation works and how to calculate that into your accounts. But let's look at this. That means if you had $1,000, 2% of what you put in is the amount that ended up being. So it ended up being $46,000. $45,000 of that was earnings, meaning 98% of your account value was money that you didn't have to do anything for. You just had to do that first $1,000. You still keep that $1,000 at the end, assuming you don't somehow lose your entire account, which again is incredibly unlikely. But you have 98% of the funds that were just the growth of what you did. That is incredible. And I hope you can appreciate how much this works in a 401k, especially knowing it's a retirement account where this is going to keep compounding over an incredible amount of time. And the earlier you start, it is substantially easier. Now, let's say you keep investing just $1,000 a month. How would that work? So in that first example, we only invested $1,000 one time. If we keep doing that and get that same rate of return and continue $1,000 every single year, then after 10 years, you would have $18,531. After 20 years, you would have $64,000. After 30 years, you would have $181,000. And after 40 years, you would have $487,000. That is incredible. This is a little bit aggressive of a rate of return because you will probably, again, put more bonds into your account. But I want to highlight the concept here and the importance of seeing that this growth of starting early is huge and continuing to contribute, which is one of the benefits of a 401k, is it automates so much of this and makes it a lot easier for you. You could be in an incredible position. You might also be wondering when I should start. There's a common phrase in finance, which is that the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago, and the next best time is today. That's been attributed to a lot of people. But essentially, it's incredibly important to just start as early as you can. If you start early, it is exponentially easier. So let's take a look at what each dollar is expected to turn into by the time that you turn age 65. So if you start investing at age 20, every dollar you invest is projected to turn into approximately $88.35, which is incredible. If you can 88 times your money, that is an investment I would take every day. That sounds just wonderfully incredible. And again, if we're talking about investing for the long term and you wait even longer than that, let's say you start investing at 20 and you don't retire till 65. Now that's 45 years. Like, you can even beat that, which is just incredible. So that's wonderful. If you wait till age 30, it's still really powerful of being $23.06, but you can see that it's dramatically lowered here. This is not as much as 88, but it's still amazing. It's still amazing to be able to 23x your money. If you wait till 40, it is now $7.23, which is still encouraging, but you can see you have to start working a lot harder if you haven't started yet. So don't panic if you're 40 and you're watching this video and you haven't gotten to that point yet. But this just goes to show, the earlier you start, the easier it is. If you wait till 50, it's $2.85, which that's where we're getting a little stressed about how to handle it. And if you're in that situation, I would recommend working with a financial coach. If you have nothing saved for retirement and you're 50, you might have to keep working a little longer, but make sure to talk to somebody, come up with a game plan, find ways to cut back on expenses, and you might be able to make things work a little bit better. Might be able to have Social Security if that stays around another 15 years, or it's not fully expected to go away at the moment, but it's something that we know is eventually going to have to go away or have to be restructured to some way. But if you wait till age 60, being really close to retirement, after those 5 years, you can get it to 1.35, so you can still get the growth and still have some money growing in there. This is based off of the Money Guy Show Wealth Multiplier, and it shows that if you start investing early at age 20 versus age 40, that it is 12 times harder to start if you start at age 40. So you have either $7.23 for every dollar you invest as the projected amount when you retire versus $88, which is just incredible. So if you're already later on that, don't give up. There's still incredible power that you can have on being able to grow that money there. But if you start early, it is so much easier for your future self, and you don't have to be stressed about money. And money issues is the number one reason people get divorced as well. And if you can be responsible really early, it just takes away so much of that stress, especially when it comes to planning for retirement and just getting something going. So I fully encourage you to just try to plan and start doing it a little bit as early as possible. I would also pay yourself first here and basically say, I'm going to invest 15% and then budget after that, or 20% or 25. Try to get to 25 if you can. If not, go for 20. If that's still tough, do 15. If you can't do that, even just temporarily, still at least like try to get the employer match, because that's just free money that's sitting there for you. But the earlier you start and the earlier you invest, it's a lot easier, and your 401k makes this really easy for you to be able to get these types of returns. People talk about the rich getting richer, which is very true that happens, but 401ks allow for people like you and me to just be able to invest in the market and not have to be this big venture capitalist or essentially Shark Tank shark. If you watch that show that has millions or billions of dollars to invest, you can participate in that whole process by participating in your 401k. It lets you be a small fish in that pond, so you can at least get started and get those huge tax benefits out of it. So the really important concept is just make it easy. Because if you try to also time the market, which again, huge topic here, make sure you pay attention for this part. We're going to look at 3 different investors. We're going to assume they invested from 1900 to 2019. This is basically just a time frame that we can look at for the stock market to get an understanding of how things work. We're going to assume these people live an incredibly long life and that they just invest throughout all these situations. So we have 3 investors. We have Sue, who just always invests no matter what. So she invests $1 a month and just will always contribute that. And that's her philosophy. We have Jim, who tries to time investing. So what he does is he invests $1 per month when not in a recession. And then when we are in a recession, he saves his money and then contributes. So he actually times the market. We assume that he times it fairly well here, okay? So that's also going to be good. But if we look at Tom, and he waits until the market is good. Let's say he's the timid investor who's like, oh, I see it going down. I get anxious about that. I don't want to lose all my money. So he says like, you know what? When it's in a recession, I'm not going to buy. I'm gonna wait until I know things are good, and then I'm gonna get my foot in the market there and essentially get that going. So he invested $1 a month when not in a recession. He sells after the recession begins, and then he invests after the recession ends 6 months later in both of those cases. So he's essentially waiting before every decision because he's like cautious and worried about how things are going to do, how the market's going to be. Let's look at how each of these people end up. So each person ends up with, we'll start with Tom, at $234,000 after that 119 years. Again, this is just for the sake of understanding how this works. Jim ends up with $257,000, so he does a little bit better, and he had to time the market to be able to do that. And we're kind of assuming that he was somewhat like all-knowing and like ended up investing in a really good time. But Sue, who just invested no matter what, actually ends up with $435,000. So she almost doubles what the other people do, which is just absolutely incredible. I've said this before, but it's rare in life that the easiest thing is often the best thing, but just continuing to always be buying is one of the best things that you can do when it comes to investing for the long run. So always be buying. Another big financial concept to know there is that the more you just keep buying, you are actually getting the better return in the market than somebody who's trying to time it. And why is that? Well, emotions override your logic. So it causes people, like the last two people there, the guys that ended up selling low and buying high, which is the opposite of what you want to do. In fact, 85% of large cap active managers did not beat the S&P 500, which is essentially, those are people that are full-time working to try to beat the market, quote unquote. And 85% of them were not able to beat just what you can probably do in your 401k, which is buying the S&P 500 as an example here. Again, not saying that's fully the only investments you should have. Again, target date funds or building your own portfolio on your own or talking with an advisor to get specific tailored advice is going to be a little bit better for you to figure out which investments you want to choose. But it just shows 85% of people who are doing this full-time professionally struggle to beat the S&P 500. So here's why it doesn't work though. The market's almost always at an all-time high. You can see on here that it's like up and down. It's like a yo-yo on an elevator, where up and down over time, but generally up in the long run. And the whole process of, if you can be buying at all of those different stages, you are being able to take advantage of that situation where it might be at the lowest point and you don't know it's at the lowest point either. So if you can always be buying, you know you're more likely to buy at that lowest point, and you're just continuing to let that keep going. And the more you do that, the more that it's called dollar cost averaging, the more that it helps just encourage the fact that you're not going to misjudge by timing the market and just always be buying. You should be somewhat excited, actually, that the market goes down to some degree, unless you're retiring soon. But essentially, if the stock market's low and you're not planning to retire or pull your funds out of the account anytime soon, you're essentially just getting stocks at a discounted price, which is incredible. I love buying things at discounts, and this is a way for you to be able to do that. So timing the market does not typically work. People are historically bad at doing this, and the people who have been successful at doing this tend to be the ones that have the loudest voices, and they're asking you to give them their money so you can get that commission, or that they can get that commission rather. So they have a stake in the game, and they might have been in that 15%. Sometimes that's also just luck too. There's a concept known as survivorship bias. That's another video topic though. But just know timing the market makes things difficult, and you're probably just going to be better off dollar cost averaging. Even if you somewhat time the market well, dollar cost averaging usually wins. Now here are historical odds of what it would be like earning money in the market. This is one of the more final important pieces of information to go over to help just attribute that whole timing the market and understanding how to handle the funds in your 401k. So if you invest in the market, your odds of being positive on a day are roughly 50-50. You don't know if the market's going to be up or down. Technically, it's a little bit more than 50-50 that it's positive, because it tends to go up in the long run. But it's almost a coin flip of if the market's going to be up or down in a day. And no one really knows. If somebody did know, they would very quickly become the wealthiest person in the world if they really knew what was going to happen every day. If you invest over a 1-year time period, 68% of the time, your return will be positive, or at least historically it's been positive. If you invest over 10 years, then 88% of the time it's been positive. And if you invest over 20 years, it has never happened that over 20 years the stock market's been negative. So we're talking about huge amounts of success within here the longer you have your money invested in the market. And again, we don't expect that everything would like tank and over 20 years it would go negative. If you're dollar cost averaging, then we're assuming like a worst case scenario here that like at one point your investment went negative over 20 years, but that still has never happened, knock on wood. But investing for the long run, continuing to invest, making it easy, trying to just pay yourself first, get your money going into your accounts. Those are huge things that help you grow your money and help you with your 401k. I hope you know now how to go essentially find a 401k that it's something from your employer. You can go to their website, essentially log in. You probably already have an account set up. You might already be auto-enrolled and contributing to it. So you might be able to up your contributions if you want or pause them if you need. I would highly encourage get that employer match. It's just free money, basically. Keep investing consistently in there. Try not to look at it all the time either. Don't let those emotions override what you need to do. Don't contribute anything in there that you know you're going to have to pull out soon. And just try to keep going for the long haul. Start early and you make it exponentially easier for your future self. If you like this video, make sure to subscribe for more finance tips, and thank you very much for watching.